He handed her divorce papers on their anniversary. She signed every page without reading a single line, then smiled. By sunrise, she was gone. No calls, no messages, no trace. And for the first time in his life, the most feared man in New York had no idea where his wife had gone or what she had left behind. If this is your first time here, welcome. Stay until the end. This story will hit differently. And drop a like, leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The reservation had been made 6 weeks in advance. Table 12 at Aurelius, a restaurant so exclusive that senators had been turned away at the door, where the lighting was engineered to make every woman look like she belonged on a magazine cover and every man look like he owned something worth covering. The kind of place that charged $400 for a piece of fish and made you feel grateful for the privilege. Darian Voss had reserved it for their 7th anniversary. His assistant sent the confirmation. His driver confirmed the pickup time. His security detail swept the block twice before the car even pulled to the curb. Everything was arranged with the same clinical precision Darian brought to every aspect of his life. The movement of money, the deployment of men, the management of violence. He was thorough. He was methodical. He was above all else controlled. What his assistant did not know, what his driver did not know, what his security detail certainly did not know, was what Darian had placed inside the breast pocket of his jacket before leaving the penthouse that evening. A leather folder, slim, dark brown, the kind that looked expensive because it was. Inside it, divorce papers, notarized, dated, waiting only for 2 signatures to become the legal dissolution of 7 years of marriage. He had them prepared 3 weeks ago. He had read them twice, signed his own name on the appropriate lines, and then placed them in the drawer of his home office beneath a stack of quarterly financial reports where Nyla would never think to look. He had told himself he was waiting for the right moment. In reality, he was waiting to see if he would change his mind. He had not changed his mind. The car moved through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets with the smooth inevitability of a river finding its mouth. October rain fell in sheets against the windows, blurring the city into streaks of yellow and white. The million lights of a place that never slept and never forgave. Darian sat in the back seat with his hands folded in his lap and watched the wet city scroll past and felt nothing in particular. That was his gift. That was also, though he would never have admitted it, his disease. Nyla was already at the table when he arrived. She had beaten him there, which she always did. 7 years, and she had never once been late to anything. Dinner, meetings with lawyers, charity galas she attended on his behalf when he couldn't be bothered. She was already seated at table 12 with a glass of still water in front of her, and her dark hair pinned up in a way that showed the long line of her neck, wearing a deep burgundy dress that Darian dimly recognized as the one she had bought for their 5th anniversary and never worn because that dinner had been canceled when a business situation required his immediate attention. She had worn it tonight anyway. She looked up when he sat down. Her eyes, dark, steady, giving away nothing, moved across his face the way they always did, the way that had once made him feel understood and now made him feel observed. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine. I ordered water. I didn't know what you'd want to drink." "Water's fine." A waiter appeared. Darian ordered bourbon. The waiter disappeared. The restaurant hummed around them. Low music, the murmur of other people's conversations, the soft percussion of silverware against china. At the table nearest to them, a couple in their 60s leaned toward each other with the ease of people who had spent decades learning how to occupy the same space. Darian looked at them briefly and then looked away. Nyla was watching him. "You're quiet," she said. Not an accusation, an observation. "I'm always quiet." "You're a different kind of quiet tonight." He didn't answer that. The bourbon arrived, and he wrapped his hand around the glass and thought about how to begin, and decided that there was no way to begin that would make this anything other than what it was. He reached into his jacket and removed the leather folder and set it on the table between their water glasses and the small vase of white flowers the restaurant had placed there for ambiance. Nyla looked at the folder. She did not reach for it immediately. She looked at it the way she looked at most things, without hurry, with a quality of attention that had always made Darian feel, even at the best of times, as though she was reading something in the air around an object rather than the object itself. "What is this?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. Open it. She opened it. The papers were inside, clean and crisp, with his signature already in place on every required line. She looked at the first page for a moment. Then she turned to the second, then the third. She did not read them, not the way a person reads something unfamiliar. She moved through the pages the way someone moves through a room they have already memorized, confirming rather than discovering. When she reached the last page, she set it down carefully. Celeste Vale, she said. He hadn't mentioned Celeste's name anywhere in the papers. He didn't ask how she knew. Yes, he said. Nyla nodded once. A small nod, barely a movement at all. She picked up her glass of water and took a small sip and set it back down with the same precision with which she did everything. The rain pressed against the restaurant's tall windows. Across the room, the older couple were laughing at something. You've been seeing her for how long? Nyla asked. That's not relevant to... How long, Darian? He held her gaze. 14 months. She absorbed that. Her expression did not collapse. It did not harden. It remained what it always was, composed, present, impossible to fully read. He had spent 7 years trying to read that face, and had never entirely succeeded, and that failure had frustrated him and fascinated him in equal measure until the fascination ran out and only the frustration remained. And you love her, Nyla said. Not a question. I did once, before all of this. He gestured vaguely, meaning the empire, the organization, the criminal machinery that had consumed the last decade of his life. She represents something I had before I became... He stopped. Before you became what you are, Nyla finished quietly. Yes. Another silence. The waiter reappeared, hovering at the edge of the table with a question about their order. Darian dismissed him with a look. The man evaporated. Nyla was still looking at the papers. She reached into her small clutch and produced a pen. A simple ballpoint, nothing fancy. And without ceremony, without hesitation, without reading a single word of the document in front of her, she signed her name on every page that required it. Her handwriting was what it always was, clear, unhurried, certain. She closed the folder and slid it back across the table to him. Then she looked up, and she smiled. It was not the smile Darian had expected. He had braced himself without fully acknowledging that he was bracing, for tears, for anger, for the particular cold fury that came from a woman who had given years of herself to a man and was now being handed the legal documentation of his indifference. He had prepared himself for a scene, or at the very minimum for pain made visible. What he got was a smile, calm, unreadable, carrying something in it that he couldn't name and couldn't dismiss, something that sat in the back of his skull the way a sound sits in a room after its source has stopped. I hope she gives you everything you think you're looking for, Nyla said. She rose from the table. She picked up her small clutch. She looked at him one more time. Not with hatred, not with sorrow, not with any of the emotions he had anticipated. And then she walked across the restaurant with her spine straight and her steps unhurried, and she pushed through the door into the October rain. Darian sat alone at table 12. He picked up his bourbon. He finished it. He told himself he felt relief. The penthouse was silent when he returned. Not the silence of someone sleeping, or of someone in another room, or of someone deliberately making themselves absent as a form of protest. A different silence, the kind that has texture to it, the kind that tells you, before you have turned on a single light, that a space has been vacated. He walked through the front rooms without urgency. His security detail waited downstairs. His driver had been dismissed for the evening. It was just Darian and the penthouse, and the rain still hammering at the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Midtown and the dark rectangle of the park beyond. He checked the bedroom. Her side of the closet was empty. Not ransacked, not hastily cleared, but empty in the deliberate way of someone who had packed methodically, over time, taking only what was theirs. There were no empty hangers left behind, no indentations in the carpet from luggage wheels, no half-open drawers with forgotten items, nothing that would suggest she had left in a hurry. She had left in complete order. He stood in the doorway of the closet for a long moment and looked at the empty shelves and the bare rod and the single remaining item, a dry cleaning bag, sealed, containing a coat he recognized as one of his own that she must have picked up without mentioning. She had even remembered his dry cleaning. He checked her bathroom. Her vanity was clear. Her medications were gone. The small framed photograph that had sat on the left side of the mirror. The two of them at a friend's wedding, before the weight of the organization had settled fully onto his shoulders, before he had become the kind of man who required a security sweep before dinner, was gone. She had taken it. He wasn't sure why that particular detail lodged itself in his chest. He walked to his office and checked his phone. No missed calls. No messages. He called her number from muscle memory and listened to it ring 6 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, level and unhurried, inviting him to leave a message. He hung up without speaking. He called again. Same result. He set the phone down on his desk and looked out at the rain. By midnight, he had sent 3 messages. None of them were answered. By 2 in the morning, he had his security team making discreet inquiries. By 4, the inquiries were no longer discreet. By sunrise, every asset Darian Voss commanded had been tasked, in one capacity or another, with the same objective: find Nyla Hartwell. The answer that came back, at first from his security chief, and then hours later from the 2 private investigators he had on retainer for exactly this kind of situation, was the same answer in different words. Nothing. She had gone, and she had gone clean, and she had left nothing behind her that a person could follow. 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner, Celeste Vale moved into the penthouse. She came with furniture, her own, not Nyla's, and with boxes of her things and with a decorator she had apparently already hired, who arrived the following Tuesday to assess the space with the brisk professionalism of someone who had been given this assignment well in advance. The decorator had opinions about lighting and about the view and about what she called the emotional coldness of certain neutral palettes. Darian told her she could do what she liked with the living spaces. He closed the door to his office and made 3 phone calls. Celeste was 34 years old. She had grown up in Connecticut, studied art history, briefly pursued a career in gallery curation, before discovering that proximity to power was more interesting than proximity to art. She was sharp-minded and physically striking, and she moved through social situations with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime practicing. When Darian had known her 12 years ago, before his father's death, before the inheritance of the organization, before all of it, she had been something closer to what she really was. Ambitious, yes, but also young enough that the ambition hadn't yet calcified into something harder. Now she was 34 and she wanted things, and she was good at wanting them in ways that looked like something else. He knew this about her. He had always known this about her. He told himself it didn't matter. In the first weeks, the tabloids did what tabloids do. His name had been in the papers before. Carefully worded articles that hovered around the edges of what he was without ever landing directly on it. Profiles that described him as a businessman with varied interests, a philanthropist with connections to various municipal initiatives. Now his name appeared alongside Celeste's, and the framing was of a rekindled romance, a powerful man who had chosen love over a long marriage that had run its course. The word glamorous appeared in 3 separate publications. Nyla's name appeared in none of them. This should have felt like a victory. He was aware, at some level, that it should have felt like a victory. He had exited a marriage that had stopped working, a marriage in which he felt increasingly unseen, in which Nyla's quiet competence had somehow made him feel diminished rather than supported. And he had reclaimed something from his life before the organization had consumed it. He was supposed to feel free. He felt, instead, like a man who had put down a weight he'd been carrying so long that its absence had changed the way he moved. The first crack appeared at a dinner party hosted by one of his associates' wives. The gathering was at a townhouse on the Upper East Side. 30 people, catered, the kind of event that required a certain kind of presence and a certain kind of conversation. Darian had attended dozens of these over the years with Nyla at his side, and it had never occurred to him to notice how much of the social architecture she quietly maintained. The way she remembered names, spouses, children's ages. The way she navigated the invisible tensions between certain couples and certain business rivals with the deftness of someone diffusing a mechanism she had mapped in advance. The way she knew when to speak for him and when to let him speak, and when to move them both toward the exit before a conversation became a problem. Celeste moved through the party like a woman who wanted to be seen moving through a party. She was charming. She said the right things to the right people. But twice Darian watched her misjudge a room, once saying something flippant to the wife of a man Darian owed a significant professional debt, once pressing a business conversation with one of his captains past the point where such conversations were appropriate in mixed company. Each time, Darian managed the situation. Each time, Celeste looked at him afterward with an expression that suggested she did not understand what had required managing. On the ride home, she was bright and animated, talking about the party in a way that suggested she had experienced a completely different event. "That was wonderful," she said. "I think I made a real impression on the Kowalski couple." Darian looked out the window at the passing city. "The Kowalski couple," he said. "Yes, Marcus and I'm forgetting her name. She was a little cold at first, but I think she came around." Marcus Kowalski's wife's name was Vera, and she had been cold because Celeste had made a passing comment about the remodel of their townhouse that landed close enough to an insult to register without being actionable. Nyla would never have made that comment. More than that, Nyla would have found out about the remodel in advance, said something specific and genuine about it, and turned Vera Kowalski into an ally before the appetizers arrived. "She warmed up eventually," Darian said. "I thought so." Celeste smiled and took his hand and leaned against him in the back of the car, and Darian looked at the ceiling and thought about a smile he could not stop thinking about. The second crack came from a phone call. One of his senior financial people, a meticulous man named Gerald Oakes, who had been with the organization for 11 years and who communicated primarily in understatement, called Darian into a meeting on a Tuesday morning and placed a folder on the table between them that contained documentation Darian had never seen before. "I want you to look at this," Gerald said. "What is it?" "The 2019 accounts, the ones from the second quarter, around the shipping situation." Darian knew what the shipping situation was. The loss of 3 containers of significant value due to a combination of Port Authority scrutiny and a rival organization's interference had been one of the worst financial moments of his organization's recent history. The shortfall had been severe enough to create genuine structural problems, debts to certain associates, gaps in liquidity that had required urgent management. He had managed it, or so he had believed. "Walk me through it," he said. Gerald walked him through it. The numbers told a story Darian had not been told at the time. The organization's recovery from the 2019 shortfall had been faster than it should have been, given the losses involved. The accounts showed bridging capital from sources Darian did not recognize, structured carefully, moved through legitimate channels, inserted with surgical precision into exactly the gaps that needed filling. "Where did this money come from?" Darian asked. Gerald was quiet for a moment. "It came from accounts registered to a holdings company," Gerald said. "A small one. I looked into it this morning. It traces back to a private investment portfolio." He paused. "The portfolio is registered to your wife." Darian looked at the folder. "To Nyla." "Yes, sir." He sat with that for a moment. The sum involved was substantial, not catastrophic to a person of Nyla's background. Her family had old money, the kind that had been quietly managed across generations, but substantial enough that its movement would have required deliberate planning. This was not impulse. This was not a gesture. This was a calculated intervention, executed invisibly, at a moment when the organization's vulnerability was real and the consequences of failure would have been severe. "She never mentioned this," Darian said. "No," Gerald agreed. "She did not." He took the folder home. He went through the accounts himself, which took most of the night. And by the time he was finished, the sun was coming up over the park, and Celeste was still asleep in the bedroom, and Darian was sitting at his office desk with the financial documentation spread in front of him, and a feeling in his chest that had no clean name. She had saved him. She had saved the organization he had always treated as the center of his universe, the enterprise that had justified every sacrifice and every absence, and every evening he had canceled, and every conversation he had not had, and every time she had stood at the edge of his attention waiting for him to turn around. And she had saved it in secret and said nothing, and expected nothing. He thought about the smile. The captains came to him one by one over the following weeks. Not together. There was no coordinated disclosure. It seemed to happen naturally, as though word had spread through the organization that certain truths were now allowable. Each man who came to Darian's office came with something specific and came with the careful manner of someone not entirely sure how the information would land. A captain named Torres, who had been with the organization for 15 years, sat across from Darian one afternoon and told him about the winter of 2020, a period when territorial conflicts with the Resnick family had made certain streets effectively ungovernable. 3 of Torres's men had families in affected neighborhoods. Nyla had arranged for those families to be relocated temporarily, quietly, using a network of safe housing she apparently maintained through a series of community organizations she supported. Torres had assumed at the time that the arrangement had come through Darian. He had recently understood that it had not. "She told me not to mention it," Torres said. "She said you had enough on your plate." Darian said nothing. 2 weeks later, a veteran called Mace, a man so reserved that an entire conversation with him could pass in 4 sentences, came to Darian's office and placed a written summary on the desk without ceremony and waited while Darian read it. The summary described a territorial negotiation that had taken place in the spring of 2021, when a boundary dispute between the organization and a smaller crew from the Bronx had been moving steadily toward open conflict. The negotiation that had resolved it, a resolution that had prevented what Mace estimated would have been a 3-week war and its attendant complications, had been conducted not by Darian's lieutenants, but by Nyla over the course of 6 meetings that had taken place in restaurants and office lobbies, and once in a public library. "She speaks 3 languages," Mace said, as though this were a relevant clarification. "I know," Darian said. "One of the crew leaders from the Bronx. His first language is Portuguese. She spoke to him directly." Mace paused. "He said afterward that no one on our side had ever spoken to him like he was a person worth talking to." Darian looked at the summary. "She never told me about any of this." "No," Mace said. He stood. "I thought you should know." He left. Darian sat in his office with Mace's summary and Torres's account and Gerald's financial documentation, and the feeling that he was assembling, belatedly, a picture of something he had been standing too close to see for 7 years. Each piece fit against the others with a precision that was almost painful. She had been everywhere. She had been in every corner of his world, fixing what was broken and shoring what was fragile and smoothing what was rough. And she had done all of it with the same unhurried competence with which she picked up his dry cleaning and signed divorce papers without reading them. He poured himself a drink and did not drink it, and looked at the city outside his window. He thought about the smile. He could not stop thinking about the smile. The security footage came from a building 2 blocks from the restaurant. His head of security, a careful man named Vincent Cross, who had been with the organization since before Darian took over, and who had the quality of someone who had seen most things, brought it to Darian's attention 6 weeks after the anniversary dinner, during a routine review of the ongoing search protocols. It showed Nyla leaving the restaurant. She walked out the front entrance into the October rain without hurrying. She had a small umbrella. Where she had produced it from, the footage could not say, and she opened it as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She turned right and walked half a block. A car was waiting for her. Not a taxi. A car, dark-colored, parked at the curb. She got into it. The car pulled away. Pulled. The driver was not one of their people. The car was not registered to anyone with a connection to the organization. The plates traced to a rental agency whose record showed the vehicle had been paid for in advance, in cash, by a name that matched no one in any database Cross had access to. What made the footage significant was not the car. It was the way she moved. Darian had watched it 3 times before he registered what his eyes were telling him. She walked out of that restaurant without looking back. Not once. She did not pause on the sidewalk. She did not stand in the rain for even a moment. She did not look up at the building or down the street toward where his car would have been, or anywhere that suggested hesitation or second thoughts or the weight of a decision only just made. She walked to the car the way a person walks to the car they called 20 minutes ago. She had planned this, not as a response to the dinner, not as a reaction to the divorce papers or the shock of the evening. She had planned this before she walked into that restaurant. She had sat across from him at table 12 in the burgundy dress she had bought for their 5th anniversary, and she had signed those papers with a ballpoint pen from her clutch, and smiled that smile, and every moment of it had been the final act of a plan she had been running for longer than he had been running his own. The realization hit him somewhere behind his sternum. He watched the footage a 4th time. "She's gone," Cross said. It wasn't new information, it was a confirmation. "She's gone," Darian agreed. He looked at the screen. The timestamp in the corner read 9:47 p.m. 23 minutes after she had signed the last page and slid the folder back across the table and said, "I hope she gives you everything you think you're looking for." 23 minutes. He sat with that number the way you sit with something that won't resolve. "Where did the car go?" he asked. "We tracked it to a parking garage in Midtown. Lost the trail there. Cameras inside the structure were down," said. "System malfunction, we think, though we can't confirm it was engineered." Cross paused. Nothing after that. Darian looked at the frozen image on the screen. Nyla at the passenger door, one hand on the handle, her face turned slightly away from the camera in the manner of someone who knew exactly where the cameras were. "She knew we'd pull this footage," he said. "That would be my read," Cross agreed. Darian stood. He walked to the window of his office. The city spread below him in the November dark, indifferent and glittering. Somewhere out there, somewhere that was not Manhattan, not the world she had inhabited for 7 years, Nyla Hartwell was living inside a plan she had made without him. The most controlled man in New York stood at his window and felt, for the first time in a long time, something that was not control. He felt afraid, not of what she might do, not of exposure or vulnerability or the operational implications of a woman who knew as much as she did moving through the world outside his protection. He was afraid because he had watched her walk toward that waiting car, and he had finally understood what that smile meant, and what it had cost her to wear it, and what it said about the 7 years that had preceded it, and the understanding had arrived the way most important things arrived in his life. Late, and at significant cost. Celeste was downstairs. She had called twice while he was in this meeting. She was planning something for the weekend, a dinner, or a function, or one of the events she attached herself to that required his presence as a kind of accessory. He would go. He would stand where he was supposed to stand and say what he was supposed to say, and come home and sit in his office and look at the footage again. He would search. He knew, standing at that window, that he would search for her, that he would dedicate the full machinery of everything he had to finding the woman who had signed those papers with a ballpoint pen and walked into the rain and disappeared as cleanly as smoke. He told himself it was because she was a liability. A woman who knew what she knew, moving in unknown space, constituted an operational risk. He looked at the frozen image on the screen. He did not believe himself. The months that followed had the quality of a fever. He kept the search running while managing everything else. The organization, Celeste, the public life they were now openly conducting together. He was functional. He was even, by most measures, effective. He closed a significant business arrangement in January that had been 3 months in negotiation. He settled a territorial question that had been simmering since autumn. He attended the right events and made the right appearances and returned home to Celeste's redecorated penthouse and the particular exhaustion of a man who is performing a life rather than living it. Celeste noticed nothing amiss. This told him something he did not want to know. In February, one of his investigators got a partial lead. A name, a city, a thread so thin it might have been nothing. The name was different. The city was far. The thread was thin. But Darian knew. He knew the way he had known, the night she walked out of that restaurant, that something fundamental had already ended. The way you know a thing you've been refusing to know, standing suddenly in its full weight. He told Cross to verify the lead. He was already planning to go himself. The city was Seattle, and the woman his investigators had found there was living a life that bore no visible connection to Manhattan or to the Voss syndicate or to 7 years of a marriage that had ended in a restaurant in the October rain. But there was the smile. There was always the smile. And Darian Voss, who had built an empire on his ability to see clearly, who prided himself on facing things without flinching, was beginning to understand that in 7 years of marriage, he had never once truly seen his wife. And now she was gone. And the question that kept him awake through the February dark, that followed him through meetings and dinners and every quiet moment of the constructed life he was living, the question was not, where is she? The question was, what did I throw away? Chitin. The search ends in Seattle, but what Darian finds there will not be what he came looking for, because the woman waiting on the other side of that lead is no longer the woman he left behind. She has become something he never prepared for. The lead came back verified on a Thursday. Cross placed the folder on Darian's desk without ceremony. A single photograph, a business name, an address in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. The photograph had been taken from a distance, through a long lens, the way all surveillance photographs were taken when the subject was someone who had learned to watch for people watching her. It showed a woman crossing a street in daylight, carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder, her hair down and loose around her face, wearing a jacket Darian had never seen before. He looked at the photograph for a long time without picking it up. The business name on the file was Meridian Forward, a community investment company registered in Washington State 14 months ago. The stated purpose was financial support and mentorship for women rebuilding after crisis, job loss, domestic situations, economic collapse. The company had 3 employees in a small office on the second floor of a building that also housed a legal aid clinic and a nonprofit focused on housing assistance. 14 months ago, Darian did the arithmetic without wanting to. 14 months ago was August, 7 months before the anniversary dinner. 7 months before the leather folder and the ballpoint pen and the smile he could not stop seeing when he closed his eyes at 2 in the morning. She had started building her exit before he had finished planning his. "She's using a different name," Cross said from the doorway. "Elena Ward. Clean documents. Not perfect, but solid. Whoever helped her build the identity knew what they were doing." "Who helped her?" "We don't know yet." "Find out." "Yes, sir." Cross left. Darian sat with the photograph. Outside his office, the penthouse had the sounds of Celeste moving through her morning, the particular rhythm of her which he had memorized without meaning to, the way you memorize things that exist in your immediate space, whether you want to or not. She was on the phone. Her voice carried through the closed door in fragments, something about a lunch, something about an event in March, something that made her laugh the specific laugh she used when she was performing for an audience of 1. He looked at the photograph. He booked a flight to Seattle that afternoon. He did not tell Celeste where he was going. He told his assistant he had business on the West Coast and would be back by the weekend. He took Cross and one other man and no one else, and he sat in the back of a town car to the airport with his hands in his lap and his jaw set, and the photograph in the inside pocket of his jacket where the leather folder had been 5 months ago. The flight was 4 hours and 40 minutes. He did not sleep. Seattle was gray and cold and wet, in a way that was completely different from New York's cold. Less aggressive, more patient, the rain coming down not in Manhattan's hard vertical sheets, but in a fine, diffuse mist that settled on everything and made the city look like a photograph that hadn't fully developed. The waterfront smelled like salt and diesel. The streets in Capitol Hill were lined with coffee shops and used bookstores, and the particular species of small business that survives because the people running it would rather be doing this than anything else. Darian stood across the street from the building that housed Meridian Ford and watched the second-floor windows for 40 minutes before Cross touched his arm. "She comes in around 9, Cross said, "leaves between 5 and 6, walks when the weather holds, takes the bus when it doesn't. She doesn't have a car? Registered to the company, doesn't use it often." Darian looked at the second-floor windows. A light was on up there. He could see movement behind the glass. Shapes, nothing distinct. "The man in the photograph," Darian said. Cross knew which photograph he meant. There had been a second one in the folder, taken the same day as the first. Nyla on a rooftop space above the building, and beside her a man Darian didn't recognize. Tall, dark-haired. The posture of someone who had spent time in situations requiring physical self-possession. "Elias Mercer," Cross said. "Former military. Search and rescue, mostly. He runs a training program out of a facility near Tacoma now. He's been in Seattle about 8 months. They met through a community organization she's connected to." "What kind of connection?" "Friendly. He volunteers with one of her partner organizations. They have coffee sometimes. Lunch occasionally." Cross paused. "Nothing confirmed beyond that." Darian looked at the building. "He looks at her like something's confirmed," Darian said. Cross said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. They watched the building until 9:15, when the street door opened and Nyla came out. Elena Ward, the woman in the file, the woman in the photograph, wearing a gray coat and carrying a coffee cup and moving with the unhurried purpose that was so specifically hers that something in Darian's chest shifted without permission. She turned left and walked toward the building entrance, and then she stopped. She stopped because she had seen him. The distance between them was maybe 30 feet. Enough space that she could have pretended not to see, could have continued moving, could have chosen not to acknowledge what was standing across the street in the Seattle mist. She stood for a moment, just a moment, the coffee cup held steady in one hand, her face giving away nothing visible from this distance. And then she crossed the street toward him. She stopped 4 feet away. "How long have you been in the city?" she asked. Her voice was the same, exactly the same. "Since last night," he said. She nodded once, looked across, then back at Darian. "You found me. It took a while. It was supposed to." A car moved through the intersection behind her. The mist pressed down on everything. She looked at him with the same quality of attention she had always brought to looking at him. Total, unrushed, reading something he couldn't see. And he felt, standing on that sidewalk in a city that was not his, the particular discomfort of being fully seen by someone who had already decided what they were looking at. "I'm not going back," she said. Simply. Without drama. "I know. Then why are you here?" He didn't have a clean answer for that. He had reasons. The financial documentation, the accounts, the things Torres and Mace had told him, the footage of her walking to the waiting car with her face slightly angled away from the camera. But the reasons were not the same thing as the answer, and she would have known the difference. "I need to understand some things," he said. "Some things." She looked at him. "That's vague, Darian. Can we talk somewhere?" She was quiet for a moment. The coffee cup steamed faintly in the cold air. She looked past him briefly, at Cross and the other man standing a respectful distance back, and there was something in her expression when she looked at them. Not fear, not irritation, something closer to tiredness. "There's a place 2 blocks down," she said. "I'll give you an hour." The coffee shop was small and warm and smelled like roasting beans and wet wool. They sat at a table near the back window. Cross and the other man stayed outside. Nyla, set her cup down and folded her hands on the table and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that waiting was its own form of leverage. "The 2019 accounts," Darian said. Something moved across her face. Brief. Gone before he could name it. "Gerald found them," she said. "Yes. I wondered when that would happen." She looked out the window. "I assumed it would be sooner." "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked back at him. "Would you have let me do it if I'd asked?" He didn't answer. "You would have said no," she said. "You would have said you had it handled. You would have said you didn't need it. And then the organization would have been in serious structural trouble by March of that year, and certain people you owe significant loyalty to would have begun to question whether the Voss Syndicate was still a viable enterprise." She said all of this the way she said most things, without heat, without the particular satisfaction of someone proving a point. "So I didn't ask. That was my decision to make. And you would have made the wrong one." The words were not harsh. They were just accurate, and the accuracy of them was its own kind of brutality. Darian looked at her across the small table and felt the strangeness of this. 7 years of marriage distilled into a coffee shop in Seattle. Her hands folded on the table, the same face, the same voice, a completely different life behind her eyes. "Torres told me about the families," he said. "The 2020 relocations. Torres talks too much. Mace came in with documentation about the Bronx negotiation. Mace definitely talks too much." A brief thing that was almost humor crossed her face and vanished. "What do you want me to say, Darian? That I helped where I could?" "Yes, I did. That was never the problem." "Then what was the problem?" She looked at him. "You really don't know," she said. Not a question, not contempt. Something closer to a sorrow that had already been processed and set down somewhere she didn't have to carry anymore. "Tell me. You stopped seeing me," she said. "Not all at once. It happened the way most things happen. Gradually, then completely. I became part of the furniture. Useful furniture, maybe. Furniture you maintained because it functioned. But you stopped." She paused, not searching for words, deciding which ones to use. "You stopped asking. About anything. What I thought, what I needed, what I was doing while you were running the organization I was quietly helping keep afloat." She picked up her coffee, set it back down without drinking. "I don't think you were cruel. I don't think you intended it. I think you got very good at the life you were living, and I became background noise in it." I would have changed, he said. The look she gave him was not unkind. No, she said. You wouldn't have. Not then. You're saying it now because now you know what was happening. But Darian, knowing what I did doesn't change the fact that you were planning to leave me for 14 months while I was protecting your organization without being asked. Those two things existed at the same time. That's who we were. He sat with that. Outside the window, the mist was thickening toward actual rain. A woman walked past with two children, one on each hand. The coffee shop murmured around them. Other people's conversations, a barista calling a name, the hiss of a machine. I ended things with Celeste, he said. Nyla looked at him. That's not why I'm telling you, he said, because her expression suggested she thought it might be. I didn't come here to... Then why did you come here? The question sat between them. He looked at her hands on the table. He had known those hands for 7 years. He knew the small scar on the left index finger from a cooking incident in the second year of their marriage. He knew the way she held a pen. He knew exactly the quality of her grip on the leather folder in the moment before she signed the divorce papers without reading them. I came because I needed to know if I lost something I didn't understand, he said, or something I understood and threw away anyway. She was very still. Which is it? He asked. Both, she said quietly, at different times. The rain started. It touched the window softly, the Seattle kind, no drama in it. Nyla looked out at it for a moment, and when she looked back, her expression had settled into something that was not cold, but was definitely closed. A door that had been opened a few inches and was now gently, firmly returned to its frame. I have a 9:30 meeting, she said. Nyla, Elena. The correction was quiet. It hit him harder than a raised voice would have. Elena, he said, and the name felt wrong in his mouth in a way that was its own kind of information. I'm not finished. I know you're not. She stood, picking up her coffee. But I am. She looked at him one more time with those steady dark eyes that had always read him more clearly than he wanted to be read. You should go home, Darian. You have things to run. She walked out. He sat at the table and looked at her empty chair and listened to the rain on the window and did not go home. He stayed in Seattle. He knew it was the wrong decision. Cross said nothing, which meant Cross thought it was the wrong decision. He checked into a hotel near the waterfront and sent Cross back to the city with instructions to manage things and kept the other man, whose name was Garrett, 26 years old, reliable and quiet, as minimal security presence, because showing up to a coffee shop conversation with 2 guards was already more than the situation warranted, and he was trying not to make things worse. He watched the office building from different positions over the next 2 days. Not surveillance, exactly. Or, yes, surveillance, but the kind that had no operational objective, which made it something else. He watched her arrive in the mornings and leave in the evenings. He watched her stop to talk to a woman on the steps of the building next door, the conversation lasting 15 minutes, Nyla's whole body oriented toward the other woman in a way that suggested full attention. He watched her eat lunch alone on a bench near the waterfront on a day when the rain held off, reading something on her phone, occasionally looking out at the water with an expression he couldn't read from distance. She looked like someone who had learned to occupy her own life completely. On the second evening, Elias Mercer appeared. He came from the direction of the bus stop, tall, easy in his movement, wearing a jacket that had seen use. Nyla was coming out of the building at the same time, and they met on the steps with the naturalness of 2 people who had met on those steps before. He said something. She laughed, a real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind Darian couldn't remember being the cause of in the last few years of their marriage. Mercer held the door for a woman coming out behind her. He carried Nyla's bag when she shifted it on her shoulder, taking it without being asked in the manner of someone who had learned her habits. Darian stood across the street in the Seattle dusk and watched a man treat his wife with the casual, attentive consideration of someone who thought she was worth paying attention to. His hands were in his jacket pockets. He was aware of them, of the effort required not to do anything with them. Garrett appeared at his shoulder. Sir? Not now. Sir, we have a problem. Garrett's voice had changed register, lower, more careful, the register that meant the problem was not administrative. I got a call from Cross 20 minutes ago. There are people in the city asking about your location. Darian turned from the window. What people? Cross thinks it's Renner. The name landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Victor Renner led the organization that had been, for the last 18 months, the primary competitive pressure on the Voss Syndicate's interests in Lower Manhattan. There had been 3 incidents in the fall, 2 involving territory, 1 involving a shipment, that had been managed without escalating to open conflict. Barely managed. The situation was a container held under pressure, the lid maintained by the mutual understanding that open war was expensive for everyone.
"He knows I'm here," Darian said. "Cross thinks he's known for 2 days." "How?"
"Unknown. Could be a leak, could be someone tracked the flight."
Darian looked back across the street. Nyla and Mercer had moved down the steps and were walking away from the building. Not toward the bus stop, toward the waterfront, his bag over his shoulder and hers over his, the 2 of them moving at the same pace with the ease of people who had learned each other's rhythm. He watched them until they turned a corner. "Renner wouldn't come here for a conversation," Darian said.
"No," Garrett agreed. "He wouldn't." The rain started again. Darian stood in it for a moment without moving, doing the mathematics of the situation, the exposure, the distance from his people, the available options. And underneath the mathematics, running parallel to it, a different calculation. Renner knew Darian was in Seattle. If Renner was the kind of man to use that knowledge operationally, and Darian knew exactly what kind of man Renner was, then the question of what Renner might know, or guess, about why Darian was in Seattle had its own implications. She was in this city, she was 2 blocks away, and she didn't know. "Get Cross back here," Darian said. "All of them. Tonight." "And the other situation?" He looked at the corner where Nyla and Mercer had disappeared. "I'll handle it," he said. He didn't know yet what handling it would cost. He didn't know that the choice he made in the next 12 hours would be the choice everything else would turn on, that there was a door he was about to walk through from which there was no return to the man he had been before he walked into a coffee shop and heard his wife tell him, with perfect quietness, that she was finished. He walked back toward the hotel through the rain with Garrett 2 steps behind him and his phone already in his hand, and for the first time in his adult life, Darian Voss was afraid of what he was capable of doing to the people closest to him, and afraid of what it meant that he was only now, standing in a city that wasn't his, beginning to... He was still standing in the rain when his phone rang. Not Cross, not Garrett, a number he didn't recognize. Seattle area code, no name attached. He answered it because in his business, unknown numbers from unknown locations carried their own species of urgency. "Mr. Voss." The voice was male, unhurried, carrying the particular flatness of someone who had learned to remove all affect from their speech as a professional discipline. "You should come inside. You've been standing in the rain for 11 minutes, and it's drawing attention." Darian didn't move. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching the same street you've been watching. Room 412 of the Harborview Hotel. That's where you're staying, correct? I'll be in the lobby bar in 20 minutes. I'd suggest you come alone." The line went dead. Garrett was already at his shoulder. "Sir, did you catch the number? Running it now." "Don't bother." Darian put the phone in his pocket and started walking. "It'll be clean." The man in the lobby bar was in his 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a jacket that fit too well to be accidental. He was drinking club soda, and he had chosen a table with sightlines to both entrances, which told Darian everything he needed to know about the man's professional background before a word was exchanged. Darian sat down. He did not order anything. "Victor Renner sent you," Darian said. The man smiled, not warmly, the smile of someone acknowledging a correct answer in a context where the answer doesn't help you. "Mr. Renner is aware you're in Seattle, yes." "That wasn't the question?" "No." The man set down his glass with a small, precise movement. "My name is Caulfield. I've been in Seattle for 3 weeks. I'm here because Mr. Renner has an interest in the situation that brought you here." "What situation is that?" Caulfield looked at him with the patient expression of someone who had been told to deliver information and intended to deliver it completely, regardless of how the recipient reacted. "Your wife," he said, "or your former wife as of approximately 5 months ago. Elena Ward, as she's currently known. Mr. Renner has been aware of her location for approximately 2 months. Something cold moved through Darian's chest. He kept his face where it was. "Why?" he said. "Because she contacted us." The lobby bar continued its business around them. A couple at the far end, a bartender polishing glasses, the ambient sound of a hotel doing what hotels do. Darian sat with the sentence Caulfield had just placed in front of him and felt it restructure something in the way he understood the last 5 months. "You're going to want to clarify that," Darian said. His voice was level. He was aware of the effort required to keep it there. 6 weeks after your divorce was finalized, Caulfield said, Ms. Hartwell reached out to Mr. Renner's organization through an intermediary. She offered documentation, financial records, operational details, communications, material spanning approximately 4 years of the Voss Syndicate's activities. In exchange, she requested a specific form of protection and the resources to establish her current identity and enterprise. Darian looked at him. "She built Meridian Ford with Renner's money," he said. "A portion of it. She's repaid most of it. She's not... Mr. Renner wants me to be clear that she's not an ongoing asset. The arrangement was transactional and finite. She provided the material, received the support, and the operational relationship ended there." "But Renner kept the documentation." Of course. Darian looked at the table, at Caulfield's glass of club soda, at his own hands flat on the surface in front of him because they needed to be somewhere he could see them. He thought about the financial records Gerald had found, the accounts she had used to save the organization in 2019. She had known exactly where those accounts were, what they contained, how the money had moved. She had been inside every significant financial decision of the last 4 years in ways he had not understood until 3 weeks ago. She hadn't just left. She had armed herself on the way out. "Why is Renner telling me this now?" Darian said. "Because you're here," Caulfield said simply. "Mr. Renner is a practical man. He'd like to avoid a situation where your presence in Seattle creates complications. He wants you to understand the landscape clearly before you make decisions that affect it. And if I decide the landscape needs to change," Caulfield picked up his glass, "then Mr. Renner would be obligated to act on the documentation he holds, which would create significant problems for the Voss Syndicate's relationships with several municipal entities and at least 2 federal oversight bodies." He drank, set the glass down. He'd prefer not to do that. It's messy, but he will. Darian stood up. "Tell Renner I heard him," he said. "Mr. Voss?" Caulfield's voice stopped him without raising. "There's one more thing. The man she's spending time with. Mercer. He's not what he appears to be either. You should ask yourself how a former military rescue pilot ends up in Seattle 8 months after your divorce, working with the same community organizations as your former wife." He paused. "Mr. Renner thought you'd want to know." Darian walked out of the lobby bar without looking back. He went to his room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a long time. The math of it assembled itself without his permission, piece by piece, the way evidence assembles itself when you've been trained to see patterns. When pattern recognition is so deep in your operating system that it continues running even when the pattern is about you, even when what you're seeing is the architecture of your own blindness. She had started Meridian Forward 14 months before the anniversary dinner. She had contacted Renner 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She had provided documentation covering 4 years, which meant she had been collecting it for 4 years. While she was protecting his families and negotiating his territorial conflicts and saving his organization from bankruptcy, she had been building a parallel record, careful, systematic, the way she did everything, of exactly the kinds of activities that would matter to the specific people most capable of using them against him. She had sat across from him at 1,000 dinners and stood beside him at 100 events, and she had been, simultaneously, the most valuable asset his organization had and the most careful threat it faced. Both things, at the same time. He picked up his phone and called Cross. "Tell me about Elias Mercer," he said when Cross answered. "Full background. Don't give me the summary." Cross was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone accessing information they had already gathered but hadn't been asked to present. Former Air Force. 8 years search and rescue specialization. Honorable discharge 4 years ago. Since then he's been operating a civilian rescue training program. Certified instructor. Multiple credentials, clean record. Another pause. His sister runs a women's support organization in Portland. It has a formal partnership with Meridian Forward. That's the documented connection. His sister, Darian said. Yes, the sisters' organization and Meridian Forward have been formally partnered since a brief pause. Since 16 months ago. 16 months ago. 2 months before Nyla started building the exit. Before the anniversary dinner, before the divorce papers, before the leather folder and the ballpoint pen. Cross, Darian said. Sir, who set up the documentation Nyla provided to Renner, who built her cover identity? The silence this time was longer. Cross was a careful man. He didn't offer conclusions before he was ready to defend them. I can't confirm that without more investigation. Best current read. Someone with operational experience. The identity construction it's not amateur. The financial channels she used to move the Renner money into Meridian Forward are layered in ways that suggest professional guidance. Cross stopped. The layering looks similar to some structures we've used ourselves, historically. Someone from inside, Darian said, or someone who studied how we work closely enough to approximate it. Darian ended the call. He sat in the hotel room with the rain outside the window and the weight of the thing assembling itself in his chest. Not quite rage, not quite grief. Something that combined the structural qualities of both and was worse than either because it had no clean target. She had done what she had done in response to what he had done, and the logic of it was immaculate, and the immaculate logic of it was the most devastating part. He thought about her on the rooftop with Mercer. Mercer carrying her bag on the steps. Mercer and his sister's organization 16 months ago. She hadn't done this alone. She had been helped. And the help had been put in place before she'd needed it, which meant someone had seen what was coming before Darian had, which meant that in the ecosystem of his own life, he had been the least informed person in the room. He stood up. He needed to move. He paced the room. 4 steps to the window, 4 steps back. The particular pacing of a man who has trained himself out of outward agitation and is now running up against its limits. The rain on the glass. The harbor lights below. Seattle going about its patient northwestern business, indifferent to the fact that a man's understanding of the last 7 years was being rebuilt from the ground up in room 412. He stopped pacing. He put his jacket back on and left the room. Garrett was in the hallway. I need to find Mercer, Darian said, separately from her, tonight. Sir, Cross said, I know what Cross said. Find him. Garrett found him in 40 minutes. Mercer was at a bar near the waterfront, not drinking heavily, nursing something amber, sitting at the end of the bar with the body language of a man comfortable in his own company. Darian came in and sat 2 stools down, and the bartender came, and Darian ordered whatever was on draft and waited. Mercer looked at him, not with surprise, with the careful assessment of someone cataloging a new variable in a situation he had already mapped. Mr. Voss, Mercer said. Darian looked at him. You know who I am. I know who you are. Then you know why I'm here. I have a reasonable idea. Mercer's voice was even, Pacific Northwest even, unhurried, the voice of mountains and open water and distances that made Manhattan seem claustrophobic. You found her. You want to understand what you're looking at. What am I looking at? Mercer turned his glass slowly on the bar's surface. A woman who made a plan and executed it. That's what you're looking at. And where do you fit in that plan? I'm a friend. Your sister's organization partnered with Meridian Forward 16 months ago. Mercer's expression didn't change. A small acknowledgement in his eyes. Not surprise, the recognition of someone noting that a piece has moved to where he expected it to move. Yes, my sister runs a good organization. Elena's is better. They collaborate well. You've known her for 16 months. I've known of her for 16 months. I've known her for 8. He looked at Darian directly, and there was something in the look that was not aggressive, but was absolutely without deference. The look of a man who had been in situations that calibrated his sense of what was actually dangerous, and had made his assessment. I know what you're trying to figure out, whether I was part of the original setup, whether there's something there that threatens your interests. He picked up his glass. I'm not going to have that conversation with you. What I'll tell you is that the woman you're looking for is not the woman you were married to. Not because she changed. She was always this person. Because you never looked. Darian's hand tightened on the bar. You don't know anything about my marriage, he said. Quiet. The quiet that people who knew him well had learned to read correctly. Mercer seemed to read it correctly, too. He set his glass down and turned on the stool to face Darian more directly, in the manner of someone who had decided to say the thing clearly rather than around its edges. I know she worked for your organization without title or compensation for 7 years, Mercer said. I know she kept 3 of your people's families out of harm's way during a conflict you were too busy managing to notice had reached the residential level. I know she prevented what your own men told her would have been a significant territorial war by spending 6 weeks in a language and a context you had never bothered to learn. And I know she left you documentation that could flatten everything you've built, and she gave it to someone else instead of a federal agent, because even after everything, she was trying to limit your exposure. He held Darian's gaze. She gave Renner the minimum, enough to protect herself, not enough to end you. Darian sat very still. She could have gone to a federal agent, Mercer said again more quietly. She didn't. That's not nothing. The bar moved around them. Someone put money in a jukebox somewhere. The bartender refilled something at the other end. Darian sat with what Mercer had just placed in front of him and felt it settle into the architecture of everything else he'd learned in the last weeks. And what it built was not a picture of a woman who had betrayed him, but a picture of a woman who had made the smallest possible betrayal consistent with her own survival, and had made it while still, in some residual way, protecting a man who had given her no reason to. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Cross. He answered. We have a problem, Cross said. No preamble. Renner. Not Renner. Renner's a problem, but he's contained for now. A pause. Cross calibrating how to say what he was about to say, which meant what he was about to say was significant. Someone leaked your location to a different party, not Renner's people. We've been trying to identify the source for the last 3 hours. Who's the party? Vasquez. The name hit him like a door opening in a wall he'd thought was solid. Emilio Vasquez ran an operation out of Chicago that had been, until 18 months ago, a peripheral but stable presence in the broader organizational landscape. 18 months ago, the Voss Syndicate had moved on a joint shipping arrangement that had effectively edged Vasquez's people out of a significant revenue stream. It had been business. Vasquez had made clear, through the appropriate channels, that he did not see it as exclusively business. Vasquez is in Seattle, Darian said. 3 of his people are. We made them an hour ago. They're positioned around the building where your ex-wife's office is. Everything in Darian went cold and then very, very clear. She doesn't know, he said. No indication she knows. He was already off the stool. He looked at Mercer once, and Mercer had read his face, was already standing, that particular readiness in him that came from 8 years of pulling people out of situations they hadn't anticipated. Her office, Darian said to Mercer. Not a question. Mercer was already moving. So, they came out of the bar into the wet street, and Darian called Cross with his phone to his ear, and Garrett fell in from wherever he had been waiting, and the 3 of them moved at the deliberate pace of men who know that running draws attention, and attention is currently the problem. How long have Vasquez's people been on the building? Darian said into the phone. Since approximately 9 p.m. They've been static, watching, not moving yet. She might still be inside. Lights on the 2nd floor. He looked at Mercer. Is she still in there this late? Sometimes. When she has a deadline. Mercer's jaw was set. She doesn't lock the street door until she leaves. They were a block away. Darian scanned the street automatically, the particular visual parsing of someone trained to read space for threat. He spotted 2 of them before Cross finished describing their positions. A man in a gray jacket near the building entrance, too still for someone standing outside in the Seattle cold without a specific purpose, and a second man across the street at the corner, facing the wrong direction for a person waiting for anything ordinary. Cross, I have 2 more men 7 minutes out. Too long. I know. He looked at the building, 2nd floor light, burning yellow against the dark. Nyla up there with her files and her coffee and her completely parallel life, not knowing that the man she had once been married to was standing in the rain below her with the consequences of his professional history arranged around her building like a net. Vasquez didn't want documentation. Vasquez wanted the kind of leverage that you held over a man, not in a folder, but in a situation. The kind where a phone call came through, and a voice on the other end told you what was going to happen to someone, unless you made a specific decision. Vasquez was old-fashioned in that way. He believed in human leverage because human leverage was the kind you could see working in real time. He had looked at the landscape. Darian in Seattle, alone, away from his people, in a city he didn't control. And he had seen an opportunity that was almost elegant. Darian looked at the two visible men and did the calculation of what he had: himself, Garrett, and a former Air Force rescue specialist who was currently standing at his shoulder with the expression of someone who had already done the same calculation and reached the same conclusion about the available options. "There's a service entrance on the north side," Mercer said quietly. "I've used it." "Of course you have. She uses it when she works late. Feels safer than the front street after dark." Darian looked at the man in the gray jacket. "If we go in the service entrance, the one at the corner has a partial sight line." "Partial. Partial is better than full." He looked at Garrett. "You and I take the front. Make it look like nothing. Two men going into a building." He looked at Mercer. "You know the layout up there?" "Yes." "North entrance. Get to her before she decides to leave." Mercer didn't argue, didn't ask for clarification about why he should be taking direction from the ex-husband of the woman he was trying to protect. He simply moved around the side of the building, his footsteps quiet on the wet pavement, his jacket dark enough to absorb the light. Darian looked at Garrett. "Front door," he said. Slowly. They walked toward the building entrance with the manufactured casualness of two men who belonged there, and the man in the gray jacket watched them come with eyes that were making their own calculations. And Darian kept his gaze ahead and his hands visible and felt the specific species of clarity that arrived in his body when the situation had simplified down to physics, weight, distance, timing, and there was nothing left to decide except the execution. The gray-jacketed man stepped slightly away from the wall. "Help you?" he said. "Office on 2, Darian said, not stopping. "Picking up documents. Building's closed. My colleague has a key." Garrett was already at the door. Darian kept moving, and the gray-jacketed man made the decision half a second too late. His hand going to his jacket, the calculation shifting in his eyes. And by then Darian was through the door, and the door was closing, and the man on the corner across the street was moving. Inside. Stairwell. Second floor. Darian took the stairs at a controlled run and emerged into a narrow hallway that smelled like old carpet and office supplies and the specific staleness of a building that had been repurposed from something else. One door at the end was lit from underneath. He was 10 feet from it when it opened. Nyla stood in the doorway with her coat already on and her bag over her shoulder, clearly about to leave for the evening. She saw him first. Then she saw his expression. And something happened in her face. The composure shifting, not breaking, but adjusting, the way a structure adjusts when the load it's carrying changes suddenly. "Darian, don't go out the front," he said. What? "There are men outside, Vasquez's people. They're not here for me." He watched her face process it. "They're here to get to me through you." She stared at him. Behind her in the office, he heard footsteps. And then Mercer came through the interior door from the north stairwell, slightly winded, taking in the hallway with a rapid assessment that settled when it landed on Nyla, standing unharmed in the doorway. She looked at Mercer, then back at Darian. "How many?" she said. Her voice was steady. "Of course it was. 3 confirmed. Possibly a 4th we haven't located. Because of you being here." "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment. And that moment was everything she hadn't said in the coffee shop. The compressed weight of the choice he had made by coming to Seattle, by staying, by inserting himself back into her orbit and carrying his world back into hers like a contagion. He saw her understand it completely, and he saw her set it aside because she was someone who dealt with what was in front of her before she dealt with what it meant. "Elias," she said without looking away from Darian. "I know a way out," Mercer said. "Basement connects to the parking structure next door. Then we go." She looked at Darian. "You should know. Whatever's about to happen, this is the last time your problems are my problems. Do you understand me? Nyla, do you understand me?" He looked at her in the hallway of the building she had built with her own design and Renner's money and 7 years of learning how to survive the specific life she had lived with him, and he understood with a clarity that was almost physical that he was looking at the last moment of a particular kind of permission. After tonight, Whatever she chose, she would choose it from a position he could not influence. "Yes," he said. "I understand." "Then move," she said, and walked past him toward the stairwell, and Darian Voss, who had not taken direction from anyone in a very long time, turned and he followed her. That was the fact of it, stripped down to its simplest form. Darian Voss, who had not followed anyone anywhere in 15 years, turned in that hallway and followed his former wife toward a stairwell in a building she had built without him, in a city he had no claim to, with a man he didn't trust at the point position and a threat he had imported closing in from the street below. The basement smelled like concrete and standing water, and the particular cold that lives below ground level, regardless of what the weather is doing above it. Mercer moved through it with the confidence of someone who had memorized the space. Not cautiously, not hesitantly, moving with the deliberate efficiency of a man whose professional life had been built around extracting people from places they shouldn't be in. He hit the door to the connecting structure without slowing and held it. And Nyla went through and Darian went through behind her, and Garrett came last. The parking structure was 3 levels, empty at this hour except for a handful of vehicles on the first level. Residents, probably, or people working late in the adjoining offices. The fluorescent lighting was the kind that made everything look clinical and slightly wrong. Their footsteps on concrete echoed in ways that gave the space the quality of something that could hear you. Mercer moved them to the east stairwell, down 1 level, toward a secondary exit that opened onto a side street running parallel to the building Nyla's office was in. "My car's on level 2, Mercer said low. "If they're watching the building, they may have a man on the structure." "They have 4 people," Darian said. 2 on the office building. If they split the other 2, 1 stays on the primary exit, 1 covers secondary positions. He thought about it in motion, calculating while he walked. "They're not expecting us to already be out." "How long before they know?" "The man on the front door saw us go in. If he's been trying to reach the others, maybe 5 minutes ago. If he went in himself to check—" Darian looked at Garrett. "Did he follow us in?" "Negative. He held position." "Then he's called it in, and they're repositioning." Darian checked his watch without breaking stride. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Nyla was walking between them, and she hadn't spoken since the hallway. He could see her in his peripheral, her jaw set, her eyes moving, doing her own assessment of the space. She had her phone in her hand. She was not panicking. He had never seen her panic, and the fact of that, which he had taken for granted across 7 years of marriage as simply the way she was, registered now as something he had failed to understand. She wasn't calm because she was passive. She was calm because she was always thinking. "Who's Vasquez?" she said. Not to anyone specific, to the situation. "Chicago," Darian said. "Shipping dispute 18 months ago. I moved on something he considered his. And he's here because you're here." "Yes." "And I'm involved because you came to Seattle." "Yes." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The economy of it was devastating in its simplicity. He had found her, and in finding her, had pointed something dangerous in her direction, and now they were moving through a parking structure in the Seattle dark, and this was, in the most direct possible way, his. Level 2. Mercer's vehicle was a dark gray pickup, backed in, the habit of someone who preferred to leave quickly, at the far end of the row. They were 20 feet from it when Darian heard the stairwell door behind them. He heard it open. Not close. Open. The specific sound of a door being pushed from the other side. He said, "Down," in a voice that carried no volume and maximum authority, and Nyla dropped without hesitation. Not to the ground, but behind the nearest vehicle, a sedan, quick and low, and already moving laterally. And Garrett was pulling left and Darian was pulling right, and the man who had come through the stairwell door was already raising something, and the fluorescent light caught the shape of it, and Darian moved. Not away. Toward. The distance was 12 feet, and he covered it faster than the man had time to correct for. The angle wrong, the trajectory not what someone standing at 12 feet was supposed to do. And he hit the man's gun hand first, both of his own hands, the weapon discharging once into the concrete floor, with a sound that was enormous in the enclosed space, the echo of it slamming back from every surface. The man was larger than Darian and younger by maybe 10 years, but he had expected distance and he had gotten the opposite, and that surprise was the margin. Darian drove him back into the stairwell door with his full weight, and the man hit it hard and the gun was on the floor, and there was a moment, a specific moment, a breath and a half. where the outcome was entirely physical. Darian was not a man who lost physical encounters. 30 seconds and the man was down. Garrett was there with a length of something from his jacket that served the necessary purpose. The gun was in Darian's hand, and he was breathing harder than he wanted to be, and there was blood on his right hand from where the concrete had gotten it during the initial contact. Nyla was standing behind the sedan, watching, not frozen. Watching. The same way she watched everything, with full attention, taking inventory. "Elias," she said, very quietly. Mercer was at the truck, already had it unlocked. "Now," he said. They went. Bricked. Mercer drove without being told where to drive. He knew this city, its rhythms, the routes that moved through it without announcing themselves. He took side streets south, then doubled back east, the kind of routing that wasn't about getting somewhere fast, but about ensuring nothing was following. Darian sat in the passenger seat with the borrowed gun in his lap, and his bleeding hand wrapped in something Garrett had produced from somewhere, and he watched the mirrors and the streets and did not speak for the first 3 minutes. Nyla was in the back seat with Garrett. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere they don't know about," Mercer said. "That means what?" "Training facility, Tacoma, 40 minutes. He glanced at the mirror. "Unless someone wants to suggest something better." Nobody suggested something better. Darian's phone went off. Cross. He answered. "Tell me," he said. "Vasquez's other 2 men were at the parking structure. One of them went in. I assume you've met." "He's contained. The other one is unaccounted for. He was on the south side of the structure and he dropped off our track when you went mobile." Cross paused. "Darian, Vasquez himself is in Seattle." Darian looked at the rain on the windshield. "Since when?" "We're reading it as tonight. He flew commercial into SeaTac, we think, under a travel name. One of our people spotted a match 40 minutes ago near the waterfront." Cross's voice carried the specific flatness of someone delivering information they would prefer not to be delivering. "He doesn't send 4 people and come himself for a grab. This is personal. The shipping dispute was 18 months ago. The shipping dispute cost him 3 revenue streams and a 10-year partnership. It wasn't just money." A beat. "He also lost a man. In the operational fallout, someone close to him." Darian had not known about the man. He noted, with a clarity that the current situation sharpened, that there were things happening in the ecosystem of his professional life that had been happening without his full knowledge, and that gap in knowledge had costs, and some of those costs were currently in the back seat of a truck heading toward Tacoma. "My people," he said. "How long to get them here?" 2 hours minimum. I have 4 people I can have on a plane tonight. Cross country, then ground transport. 2 hours is a long time." "I know." "What about local resources?" "Working it. We have a contact here, but it's going to take time to activate, and I don't want to activate something I can't control in a city where we have no infrastructure." "Work faster." He ended the call. Mercer was watching him from his peripheral. Brief glances. Road first. The assessment of someone calculating dependencies. "How bad?" Mercer said. "Bad enough." "I have people at the facility." Darian looked at him. "What kind of people?" "Instructors, veterans, men who know how to handle a situation." He said it without drama, the flat statement of someone describing available equipment. "My facility, my people, my city. You don't have infrastructure here. I do." The calculus of it was not complicated. Darian ran it in the time it took Mercer to take a corner. He didn't like the position it put him in, dependent on a man he didn't know in a city he didn't control, for the protection of a woman who had spent the last year building her life specifically outside his reach. He didn't like any of it. "All right," he said. Mercer took the on-ramp south. The facility was outside Tacoma proper, a converted industrial property with a main building and 2 outbuildings, set back from a service road behind a fence line that looked agricultural until you noticed the cameras. Mercer brought the truck through a gate with a code and parked behind the main building out of sight line from the road. And by the time they were out of the vehicle, there were 2 men coming out of the building's side entrance, both of them Mercer's age or younger, both of them moving with the specific body language of people who knew something was wrong and were orienting themselves to it without being told. Mercer spoke to them briefly, too low for Darian to hear all of it. They nodded and moved, and the facility absorbed them. Nyla stood near the truck. She was looking at the building, her arms crossed, not against cold, but the posture of someone drawing themselves in to think clearly. Her hair was wet from the parking structure. There was a small abrasion on her right forearm that she hadn't mentioned. Darian had noticed it when she moved under the fluorescent lights. She'd caught it on something when she went down behind the sedan. He walked to her. She looked at him, coming, and something in her eyes said she was aware of the specific weight of this moment. The two of them standing in the dark outside a building in Tacoma. All the context stripped away, down to whatever was actually true. "The arm," he said. She looked at it. "It's fine. Let someone look at it." Darian. The way she said his name, not sharp, but carrying a fatigue that was different from physical tiredness. "Stop. I'm not. You're managing me. You've been managing everything for the last hour, and I understand that's what you do. That's what you're built for. But I am not one of your assets, and I am not someone you get to." She stopped herself, exhaled slowly. The rain was light here, barely registering. "Tell me what we're dealing with," he told her. Vasquez. The shipping dispute. The man Vasquez had lost. Vasquez in Seattle personally, which changed the nature of the operation from tactical to something that had the texture of a vendetta. She listened without interrupting. This was something she had always done. Received information completely before responding to it, without the interjections and redirections that most people inserted into a briefing to demonstrate they were following. She just listened, and when he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He'll know you left the city," she said. "He knows. He'll go to what you value." "There's nothing here Darian stopped. She looked at him. "He'll stay here," she said. "Because you stayed here." The logic of it was ugly and exact. Vasquez didn't need to know the specifics of why Darian was in Seattle. He needed to know that Darian was still here after being exposed, which meant there was something here worth staying for, which meant that thing could be the pressure point. "I should have left," Darian said. "Yes." Nyla held his gaze. "You should have." It was not cruel. It was just true. And the truth of it landed the way truth lands when it's too late to change the thing it's describing. Inside the facility, lights were moving. Mercer's people getting into position, the building waking up in the quiet way of people who knew what preparation looked like and went about it without needing to be loud. Garrett had moved to a position near the gate. Darian's hand throbbed under the wrapping. His phone rang again. Not Cross. A number he didn't recognize, not the Seattle area code this time. He answered, "Mr. Voss." A different voice from Caulfield's year, rougher, the Spanish of someone who had learned English as a second language and never lost the original architecture underneath it. "I think you know who this is." "Vasquez." "Good. I want to keep this simple." The voice was even, measured, the control of someone who had decided before making the call what he was going to say and was not going to be moved from it by anything that happened on the other end. "You took something from me, a man I trusted. You may not have known his specific value to me. I'm willing to believe that. But the outcome is the same regardless of your knowledge. I am here to collect an equivalent." "You're not touching her," Darian said. The words came out in a register he hadn't used in a long time. Not the managed voice, not the controlled professional delivery. Something below that. "Then come out." Simpler than Darian had expected. "You, alone. The facility you're in. Yes, I know where you are. We've had 40 minutes. Come out, and we resolve this between us, and the woman goes back to her life, and I go back to mine." Darian looked at Nyla. She was watching him with an expression that told him she could read the contours of the conversation from his half of it. "You'll let her go," Darian said. "She's not relevant to me. She never was. This is about you. And if I come out, then we have a conversation about what you owe me." Darian said, "Give me 10 minutes. 5, Vasquez said, and hung up. Nyla said, "You're not going out there. He has people outside. Then we deal with his people." Her voice had changed. The composure still there, but something underneath it now. Something with heat in it. "You are not walking out of this building because a man with a grudge told you to. That is not—" She stopped, looked at him with the dark eyes he had known for 7 years and never fully understood. "That is not what happens." "Nyla, Elena, not right now.
His voice came out rougher than he intended. Right now, you're Nyla, and I'm telling you, I'm not going to let someone use you as a mechanism. That's finished. Do you understand me? That is finished. She stared at him. The facility hummed around them. Generators, quiet movement, the specific alive quality of people getting ready for something. Mercer appeared in the side doorway. We have visual on 4 men outside the perimeter. 1 vehicle on the service road, dark SUV. They're not moving yet. Vasquez gave me 5 minutes, Darian said. 3 of those are gone, Mercer said. He looked at Darian with that level assessment. What do you want to do? Darian looked at the gate, at the service road beyond it, dark in the rain, at the situation he had built, piece by piece, choice by choice, over the last 18 months. The shipping deal that cost Vasquez a man, the 14 months of not seeing what was in front of him, the flight to Seattle, the hotel room, the coffee shop, the parking structure, all of it converging in this facility in the dark outside Tacoma, with his former wife standing 5 feet away, and a man outside who had decided that equivalent pain was the appropriate currency. He made a decision. Mercer, he said, your men. What are we working with? 4 instructors, all combat trained, 2 have weapons here, standard safety protocol for the facility. I have the weapon from the parking structure. Darian looked at Garrett. What are you carrying? Garrett opened his jacket. I have 4 men coming from the city, Darian said. 2 hours. We need to last 2 hours, or we need to end it before they get here. He looked at Mercer. Your facility, your ground, you know it better than he does. Mercer nodded once, the nod of someone who had been waiting to be asked. There's a reason I built this place where I built it, Mercer said. Sight lines, approach vectors, the fence layout. I know every inch of this property in the dark. He paused. I've run night extraction drills here 100 times. I know exactly which approach Vasquez's people will try to use if they come in. They'll come in, Darian said. The 5 minutes are up. As if in answer, the facility's perimeter lights, motion-activated, mounted high on the fence posts, came on. All of them, simultaneously, on the north side. Mercer said, East. They're coming east to draw attention north. He was already moving. Back of the main building. Now. Nyla moved. She moved without being told to, without waiting, heading for the interior of the building, because she had already assessed the geometry and understood what the interior offered that the exterior didn't. And Darian watched her go and felt something lurch in his chest. The specific terror of a man who has understood, too late, and with terrible completeness, exactly what he has been willing to lose. He turned toward the east fence with the borrowed weapon in his hand, and crossed the dark yard with Mercer on one side and Garrett on the other, and 2 of Mercer's men coming from the outbuilding to the south. And the rain came down with the patient indifference of weather that has no stake in outcomes, and somewhere outside the perimeter, Emilio Vasquez was making his own calculation about what the next 60 seconds were going to cost everyone involved. And Darian Voss ran the last 40 feet to the east fence in the dark, and took a position, and waited, and felt his heartbeat in his split hand and in his temples, and thought about a smile in a Manhattan restaurant 7 months ago, and what it had cost the woman wearing it, and what it was going to cost him to. The first man came over the east fence at the corner post. Darian saw him before he landed, the shape of him against the lesser dark of the sky, the specific silhouette of someone trained to move over obstacles quickly and quietly, and he was neither quick enough nor quiet enough because Mercer had built this facility with the knowledge that fences are suggestions, and the real perimeter is the ground beyond them. There were motion sensors embedded in the gravel along the inside of the fence line, invisible in the dark. And when the first man's boots hit the gravel, they triggered a light in the main building that told Mercer's people exactly where the breach was before the man had taken 2 steps. Darian was already there. He took the man down without the weapon, close enough that using it would have announced their position to everyone outside the fence, and Darian was not ready to announce their position yet. It was fast, and it was ugly, and it cost him something in his right shoulder, the old injury finding the exact angle it had been waiting for. And when it was done, the man was on the ground, and Darian was breathing through his teeth, and Garrett was beside him, taking over the containment. 2 more on the north, one of Mercer's men said from 10 feet away, his voice barely above a murmur, moving along the fence line. Vasquez, Darian said, not yet visible. Vasquez would not come in with his people. That was not how men like Vasquez operated. They applied pressure from a position of observation and waited for the thing they were pressuring to break open.
He was outside the perimeter, somewhere in the dark, with the SUV and whatever else he had brought, and he was watching the fence line activity and recalculating, the way any experienced man recalculated when the first approach didn't produce what he expected. What he had expected was a man coming out. What he had gotten was silence and a fence breach that had not produced screaming. Mercer came from the north side of the building at a controlled run, low, staying in the shadow of the structure. He reached Darian and crouched, and the two of them were close enough that Darian could see the focused quiet in his face, the expression of someone in their operational element. All the social complexity burned away, down to the clear, hard core of a man who knew what to do in the dark. "He's going to reposition," Mercer said. "He's going to try the vehicle," Darian said, "through the gate. If his people have us occupied at the fence line, he'll try to drive through the gate and end it fast." Mercer nodded. "Gate's reinforced. He doesn't know that. He'll find out. He'll find out at about 15 miles per hour." Mercer looked at the gate. "Which is going to make noise." "Yes." "And noise is going to bring attention." "Yes." Darian looked at him. "Which is why we want him to try it before his people finish working the fence. If he commits the vehicle while his men are still out there, he's divided." Mercer was quiet for a second. Then, "You want to bait the gate." "I want to bait the gate." "What's the bait?" Darian said, "Me, at the gate, visible." Mercer looked at him with an expression that was not quite respect and not quite exasperation, something that lived in the compound between them. "She's going to have opinions about this. She can have them after." He moved before Mercer could construct an argument, along the shadow of the main building toward the front, where the gate sat at the end of the service road, and the dark beyond it held whatever Vasquez had brought. He stayed against the building until he was at the corner, then stepped out into the open space in front of the gate. Illuminated, visible, exactly what a man waiting to be seen looks like. He stood there. 3 seconds. 5. He could feel the crosshairs of an assessment on him, the specific sensation, impossible to explain to people who haven't experienced it, of being inside someone else's decision, the weight of being the object rather than the subject of a calculation. 7 seconds. The SUV's headlights came on at the end of the service road. It started moving. Darian held his position for 2 more seconds, long enough for Vasquez to commit, long enough for the vehicle to reach the speed that turned it from a vehicle into a statement. And then he moved left, hard, back toward the building wall, and the SUV hit the gate at what had to be 40 miles per hour, and the gate did what reinforced steel gates do when they absorb 40 miles an hour vehicle. It stopped the vehicle while the vehicle tried to continue, and the sound of it was enormous in the quiet facility, a compression of metal against metal that rolled out across the Tacoma dark and started dogs barking somewhere in the distance. The airbags deployed. The SUV sat in the destroyed gate frame, engine ticking, driver stunned. Vasquez was not in the SUV. Darian understood this in the same moment he heard Mercer shout something from the north side of the building. A single word, sharp, the kind of word that means position compromised. And then there were 2 shots from inside the facility perimeter, from the north, and then one more, and then silence. He ran. The north side of the facility was a concrete apron between the main building and the first outbuilding, a space used for equipment staging, lit now by the perimeter lights that had come on with the fence breach. In the middle of that concrete apron, 2 of Vasquez's men were down. Garrett was against the outbuilding wall with blood on his left arm, still standing, the weapon in his right hand. Mercer was at the corner of the main building and opposite him, with his back to the second outbuilding and a gun held in the careful way of someone who had been using guns since before it was legal for him to do so, was Emilio Vasquez. He was in his 60s, shorter than Darian had imagined, compact, with the coiled physical economy of a man who had survived a long time in situations that required efficient use of what he had. His face was the face of accumulated losses, a map of choices that had each seemed necessary at the time and had together built something that could not be simplified into either villainy or grievance but was, instead, just the specific weight of a life lived inside violence. He was looking at Darian, not at Mercer, not at Garrett, at Darian. "The gate was a good idea," Vasquez said. His voice was the same as the phone, even, carrying its original architecture underneath the English. I didn't expect you to stand there. It worked, Darian said. It worked. Vasquez looked at the two men on the ground. They were alive. Darian could see that, the specific immobility of men who had been stopped rather than ended. Marco Delgado, Vasquez said. You don't know that name? No. He was 29. Vasquez said it without performance. Just the fact, placed in the air between them. He was running his first independent operation, the Seattle shipment. When your people moved on the containers, he was with the product. He made a decision to defend it. He paused. It was a bad decision. He was 29, and it was a bad decision, and now he's dead, and his mother asks me every month what happened, and I have been telling her for 18 months that I am handling it. Darian stood in the lit concrete apron in Tacoma and looked at a man who had flown across the country to deliver a specific kind of accounting, and he felt the weight of what Vasquez had just placed in the space between them. Not the tactical weight of it that was already managed, the men down, the gate destroyed, crosses people 2 hours out, Vasquez's remaining operational capacity roughly zero. The other weight, the weight of Marco Delgado's mother asking a monthly question. I didn't know about him specifically, Darian said. I know. That doesn't change what happened. No, Vasquez said. It doesn't. He looked at Darian with the eyes of someone making a final assessment. You came to Seattle for a woman. Darian didn't answer. I watched you stand at that gate, Vasquez said. You stood there so I would commit the vehicle. You put yourself in front of it. A man doesn't do that for a business calculation. He looked at the gun in his own hand with the expression of someone reviewing a document they had already decided not to sign. Marco Delgado would have done something like that. He had that quality, the willingness to stand in the way of the thing. He was quiet for a moment. I miss him. The night held still around them. Rain had stopped. The facility lights hummed. Vasquez lowered the gun. He lowered it the way a man lowers something he has been carrying for a long time, slowly, with the full awareness of what the lowering costs, what it concedes, what it does not repair. He set it on the concrete apron and took 2 steps back from it. This doesn't finish the account, he said to Darian. I want you to understand that. What you owe for Marco Delgado doesn't disappear, but I'm not going to collect it this way. He looked at the building, at the facility, at the space that held no version of the outcome he had come here for. A boy is still dead. Collecting anything tonight doesn't change that. Darian said, His name, Marco Delgado. Vasquez looked at him. I'll remember it, Darian said. That's not enough. I know it's not enough, but I'll remember it. Vasquez looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the destroyed gate, stepping through the warped frame, past the ruined SUV, out onto the service road into the dark. He walked the way Nyla had walked out of that restaurant 7 months ago, with direction, without looking back. Mercer let him go. Darian let him go. Garrett slid down the outbuilding wall and sat on the concrete with his back against it and held his arm and breathed, and one of Mercer's men came around the corner and crouched beside him with a first aid kit that had the well-used look of a kit that had been opened before. Darian stood in the middle of the apron. He became aware after a moment that his legs were shaking. Not visibly. He was controlling it. But the shaking was there, the physical system running its delayed invoice for the last 2 hours. His shoulder was a specific, insistent pain. His hand had bled through the wrapping. He was standing in a facility in Tacoma at what was probably 2 a.m, and the woman who had planned her disappearance for more than a year was somewhere in the main building behind him. He turned around. She was standing in the doorway. She had been there long enough to have seen Vasquez walk out. He could tell from her face, the way it carried the last few minutes, everything she had witnessed through that doorway processed and already being filed in the particular internal archive she kept. She was holding a bottle of water. She had found it somewhere in the facility, the way she found what was needed, the way she had always found what was needed. She walked across the concrete apron and held it out to him. He took it, drank. The water was cold and tasted like the container, and he had never been more grateful for anything. You let him walk, she said. Yes. He'll come back. Maybe. Or he won't. He came here to deliver something, and he delivered it. And going home empty is its own kind of end. Darian looked at the destroyed gate. He's 63 years old. He was going to lose this tonight regardless of how it went. I think he knew that. Nyla was quiet, looking at the gate.
Marco Delgado, she said. You heard. I heard. 29, Darian said, running his first operation. I didn't know his name until tonight.
She looked at him with those eyes, and he understood. Without her saying it, without needing it said, that this was the thing. Not Vasquez, not the gate, not the parking structure or the stairwell or the 7 months since the anniversary dinner. The thing was this, that somewhere in the machinery of the life he had been running, a 29-year-old had made a bad decision and died for it, and Darian had not known his name, had never known his name, had never thought to know his name. The shaking in his legs got worse. He put a hand against the building wall. Sit down, Nyla said. I'm fine. You're not. Not a judgment, just accurate, the way she was always just accurate. Sit down, Darian. He sat down against the building wall next to a first aid kit and a wounded man and let the concrete take his weight and closed his eyes for a moment and felt 7 months and 7 years and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been running at speed for so long that stopping feels like a kind of falling. Nyla sat beside him, not close enough to touch, just beside. Present the way she had always been present, fully, without performance, without requiring anything from the moment except to occupy it honestly. They sat in the Tacoma dark and listened to Garrett breathing and the distant sound of what might have been sirens 2 miles away and the facility generators and nothing else. The documentation you gave Renner, Darian said. Yes. You gave him the minimum. She didn't answer immediately. He opened his eyes and looked at her profile, the long line of her, the way she sat with her back straight even now, even here, even after everything the last 2 hours had contained. Mercer told you, she said. Yes. He shouldn't have. He thought I needed to know. He was probably right. She looked at the sky above the facility, the particular dark of a northwest night with cloud cover and no stars. I could have given them everything. You know that. I had everything. 4 years of it. I know. And you want to know why I didn't? He was quiet. He had asked this in a dozen ways over the last months without having the words for the specific question, and now that the words were available, he found he wasn't certain he wanted the answer in the way he had believed he wanted it. He was afraid the answer would be small, practical, tactical, the calculation of a woman managing her exposure. He was afraid the answer would be large, something about who she was that made him understand, too late, what he had been living beside for 7 years without comprehending. You don't have to answer it, he said. I know I don't. She looked at him. I didn't give them everything because giving them everything would have been about destroying you. And even at the worst of it, even in the worst of the last year, I didn't want to destroy you. She said it the way she said the difficult things, which was the way she said everything, without flinching, without softening it into something easier to receive. I wanted to be free of you. That's different. The distinction landed precisely. Yes, he said. It is. I spent 7 years trying to be worth your attention, she said. I want you to understand that. Not complaining about it. I made choices. I stayed. I did the things I did because I believed in what we could have been. But I spent 7 years invisible inside a marriage to a man who was very good at seeing everything except the person in the room with him. She was not crying. Her voice was what it always was. And then I stopped. And leaving you with the minimum was the last thing I did for you. And I did it so I could stop. Not for you, for me. So that I could walk away clean and not be the person who dismantled you. You were protecting yourself, he said. I was protecting myself, she agreed. And maybe also the 7 years. Maybe also the things that were real in it. She looked back at the sky. Both can be true. He looked at his hands, the wrapped one, the blood on the other, the hands of a man who had built something and defended it and had not known, for most of the building and defending, what he was spending to do it or what the currency actually was. I'm going to dismantle some of it, he said. She looked at him. The organization. The parts that cost. I've been building towards something I stopped believing in 3 years ago and kept building anyway because it was what I knew how to do. He said it carefully, not because the words were hard to find, but because he wanted them to be accurate. Not all of it. I'm not going to pretend I'm going to become someone I'm not, but some of it needs to come down. Because of tonight, she said. Because of Marco Delgado, he said. Tonight was a symptom. The disease is older.
She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read what was in her face, which was familiar. He had never been able to fully read her, and this had been his failure more than her opacity. She was not a closed person. She was a person who gave you what she gave you and trusted you to pay attention, and he had not paid attention. And now he was sitting against a wall in Tacoma at 2 a.m. trying to read a face he should have learned years ago. "I'm not coming back," she said. "I know. I need you to actually know that, not to hear it and file it as a temporary condition." She held his gaze without difficulty, the way she always held things that were difficult without looking like they were costing her. "Elena Ward has a life. It's a good life. It has things in it that I didn't know I needed because I spent 7 years not having them." "Mercer," Darian said, not an accusation, just placing the word in the conversation where it belonged. "Among other things," she didn't look away. "He sees me. I know how that sounds. But it's the only way I know how to say it. He asks questions, and then he listens to the answers, and then he asks the next question. That's not—" She stopped. "That's not a small thing." "No," Darian said. "It's not." They were quiet. Garrett said from 6 feet away, without opening his eyes, "Cross's people are 90 minutes out." "Thank you, Garrett," Darian said, just flagging it.
Us. Cross arrived at 4:15 in the morning with 4 men and the controlled urgency of someone who had been managing a situation from a distance for several hours and was now prepared to manage it from close range. He assessed the facility, the contained men, the destroyed gate, Garrett's arm, and Darian's general condition in approximately 90 seconds, and then he pulled Darian aside and spoke quietly for 5 minutes, and Darian listened and made 3 decisions, and Cross went to implement them. Mercer's people were released from the situation with the particular careful thanks that men in Darian's position gave to people who had done something that could not be officially acknowledged. Mercer himself stood near his truck in the early morning, the facility coming down from its heightened state around him, and when Darian walked toward him, he didn't move, just waited with that same stillness. "Your facility," Darian said. "I'll repair the gate. Send the bill to Cross. He'll handle it." Darian looked at him. The dawn was beginning somewhere behind the clouds, the dark thinning slightly in the east. "She chose well." Mercer looked at him. "I know. I mean that." He held Mercer's gaze. I'm not positioning it. I'm telling you that she chose well, and I can see it, and I'm glad she did." Something shifted slightly in Mercer's face, not softening, exactly, the removal of a readiness he had been maintaining. "She didn't need you to come here," he said. "She was building something real. I know that now. She knew it before you showed up." "Yes." Darian looked at the gray sky. "That's the thing I'm going to have to live with, that she already knew it and was already doing it, and I came here because I couldn't accept that a world was being built without my involvement in it." He paused. "I came here for me. I told myself it was for her." Mercer was quiet for a moment. "She knows that. I know she does." He exhaled. "Take care of her." "I will." A beat. "But she doesn't need me to take care of her either. That's also something you should understand." Darian almost smiled. "I'm beginning to." Well, he saw her once more before the cars came. She was standing on the east side of the facility, near the fence that had been breached, looking out at the service road in the early morning light. She had her arms at her sides for once, not crossed, not holding anything, just standing in the gray dawn with her hair still loose from the night and her coat damp from the hours of moving through it. He walked to her and stopped a few feet away, and they both looked at the service road. "Where are you going now?" she said. "Home," he said. "New York." He paused. "There are things I need to take apart. That's going to take a long time." "Yes." "And Celeste. That ended before Seattle. I just hadn't closed the door yet." He looked at the pale line of the horizon beyond the service road, the east beginning to show itself. "I'm going to fund something, a program, community investment, financial support for people rebuilding. It won't look exactly like what you're doing, but it'll—" He stopped. "I'm not telling you this to make a point. I know you're not. I'm telling you because I think I finally understand what you were trying to do, and because someone should do it in New York, and I have the means to do it." He looked at her. and because Marco Delgado was 29 years old and his mother is still asking questions. Neela looked at him. In her eyes, in the gray morning light, he saw something he hadn't expected. Not warmth, exactly, and not the closure that people talked about as though it were a door you could locate and shut. Something quieter than either of those things. The specific expression of a woman who has put down something very heavy and is standing in the first morning of not carrying it, tired in the way of genuine relief. "You should have been this person earlier," she said, quietly. Not an accusation, a fact placed between them like the last piece of a thing assembled too late. "Yes," he said, "I should have. But you are now." "I'm trying." She nodded. Once. The same nod she had given him the morning in the coffee shop, the nod of someone filing information accurately. "Then go do it," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer. The last time, he understood, that he would look at her as the center of a question he was trying to answer. After this morning, she would simply be a person he had known, a person who had been more present in his life than he had deserved, a person who had extracted herself with intelligence and dignity and rebuilt something real on the other side of the extraction. He would not call. She would not want him to. He would not send messages or have Cross pull updates or find reasons to maintain a thread of contact with the life she was living in Seattle. Those were the moves of a man who still believed he was owed something, and he was not owed anything. He had been given 7 years of invisible work and invisible loyalty, and the smallest possible betrayal from a woman who had every reason to choose the largest one. That was not a debt you paid. That was a fact you lived with, and you let it change you, and you made something of the change. He turned and walked toward the cars. What? 8 months later, a community center opened in Lower Manhattan. It occupied the ground floor of a building in a neighborhood that had needed something like it for a decade. A space for financial counseling, job placement, support programs for women navigating situations that had no simple category. The funding was anonymous, routed through a foundation that had been established quietly and run by a small staff with clear objectives and no interest in recognition. Darian did not attend the opening. He watched it from a car parked half a block away. Not because he needed to see it. The reports from the foundation staff were thorough, and he trusted the people running it. He watched it because he needed to know that it existed in the physical world and not only in the financial documentation he reviewed on Tuesday mornings. He needed to see people going through the door. He watched people go through the door for 40 minutes, and then his driver asked if he was ready, and he said yes. The organization was smaller than it had been a year ago. He had taken apart the parts that needed taking apart. Not cleanly, not without cost, not without consequences that would follow him for years in the form of severed relationships and recalibrated alliances, and the particular wariness that certain people now brought to interactions with a man who had voluntarily reduced his own power. It had been difficult and expensive, and he had done it anyway because the alternative was to remain exactly what he had been, and he could not remain exactly what he had been. He thought about Marco Delgado's mother. He had sent something through a channel that could not be traced back to him. Not as payment, nothing could be payment, but as the acknowledgement of a debt that didn't dissolve simply because it couldn't be fully settled. He did not know if she had accepted it. He would never know. Some things you did without knowing the result. You did them because they were the correct thing to do and because the correct thing didn't always come with confirmation. He had learned that from someone. He heard about the Meridian Ford expansion through a business contact who had no idea about the connection. A casual mention of a Seattle investment firm doing interesting work in the Pacific Northwest, expanding partnerships down the coast. Portland, then San Francisco. A network of organizations built on a specific model of support and community investment, gaining a reputation in the field for the quality of its work and the character of the people running it. He did not reach out. He did not send word through any channel. He let the news settle into the category of things that were good and that did not require his involvement to remain good. In November, a year after Seattle, he received a single email from an address he didn't recognize. No subject line. One sentence in the body. I heard about the center. It's good work. No signature, no return address. The email account, when Cross looked into it at Darian's request, had been created and used once and then deleted. He read the sentence several times. He did not reply. There was nothing to reply to. It had been said and received, and that was the appropriate shape of it. He closed the email and put his phone in his pocket and walked to the window of his office and looked at the city he had spent 15 years building something inside, and he thought about all the people who had passed through the gravity of that something without his really seeing them. And he understood that the center in Lower Manhattan and the dismantled pieces of what had been, and Marco Delgado's name, remembered, were not redemption. Redemption was a word for stories that resolved into lightness. This resolved into responsibility, into the ongoing, unglamorous work of being different in specific ways on specific days, in the specific choices that came without announcement and required an answer. He had no illusions about himself. He was still the man he was, capable of the same calculations, the same coldness, the same willingness to move on things that others couldn't afford to move on. That didn't disappear. It didn't get replaced by something cleaner. But there was a name in him now that hadn't been there before. And there was an understanding of a smile given in a restaurant on a rainy October evening by a woman who had known, before the leather folder was opened, exactly what she was going to do. It wasn't heartbreak, that smile. He understood it now completely. It was the expression of a woman who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just set it down at last. It was freedom, worn on the face of someone who had paid the full price of it and considered the price worth paying. Darian Voss stood at his office window and looked at New York and let the understanding settle into him without trying to do anything with it. Some people are not meant to return. Some losses are the most honest things that ever happened to you. And some men, if they're fortunate, if they're paying attention for once in their lives, get the chance to become someone the people they lost wouldn't be ashamed of. He had that chance. He intended to use it. The city stretched out below him, indifferent and enormous and full of people building things and losing things and trying to understand the difference between what they wanted and what they had thrown away. And the morning came over it the way morning always came, without ceremony, without mercy, the light finding everything equally and asking nothing in return. Fade out. Fade.